My son stood in the middle of the living room and spoke in a very calm voice. "Mom, I've sold this house. You have 2 days to pack your things." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. This was the house I had lived in for nearly 40 years, the place where I raised my child, the place where my husband passed away. He didn't explain who he sold it to. He didn't say how. He only said that everything was finished, the paperwork had been signed, and the buyer was already waiting to move in. I looked at the boy I once held in my arms, and it felt as though I were staring at a stranger. In that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. I wasn't just about to lose my home. I was about to lose the last bit of trust I had left in my own child, but instead of screaming or crying, I smiled, a tiny smile, and that smile made him pause. I am 68 years old this year. My husband passed away several years ago. Since then, I've lived alone in our old suburban house. I don't use social media much. I'm not comfortable with new technology. My life is slow and quiet. Perhaps that's why many people assume I am weak. I'm no longer young, that's true, but weak is not. I remain clear-minded, independent, and aware enough to recognize when I am being pushed into danger. Before I continue, I would like to make a point. My story is not a rare one. Many older people have been hurt by their own family in similar ways. If this feels familiar, please stay with me until the end. And if you'd like to help build a community that listens and shares, please subscribe to our channel. This house has been with me for nearly 40 years. I moved here right after getting married, when my husband and I were still young and had very little money. The house wasn't large, 2 stories with a small garden in the back. Everything was simple, but it was where we began our family life. My son grew up in this house. I still remember every pencil mark on the wall where we measured his height year after year. I remember rushed mornings making breakfast, afternoons spent waiting for him to come home from school, and arguments followed by reconciliations around the dinner table. When my husband was still alive, the house was always filled with voices, conversation, laughter, sometimes sighs, but never a frightening silence. After my husband passed away, the house became quieter. At first I was afraid of the emptiness, afraid of the long evenings. But slowly I learned to slow down. I woke up early, made coffee, tended the garden, and read books. Life was no longer lively, but it wasn't lacking in anything. I had enough money to live on. I had familiar neighbors. I had a few longtime friends. I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. My son, on the other hand, was different. He left home early, studied well, and built a promising career. From the outside, everyone said he was successful. He got married, started his own family, and moved to a new neighborhood about half an hour's drive from me. His life was busy, modern, and much faster than mine. We didn't talk every day, but we weren't distant either. He called occasionally to check in. He visited during the holidays. He always remembered my birthday. The relationship between mother and son wasn't as close as it had been when he was young, but there was no tension. I thought that was normal when children grow up. Everyone eventually builds their own life. I never asked him to stay close to me. I didn't want to become a burden. I never thought I needed someone to take care of me. I still drove myself. I still did my own shopping. I still made my own decisions about my life. I believed my son saw that. If there was one thing that made me careless, it was trust. I trusted that no matter how busy he became, no matter how much things changed, he was still my son. I trusted that this house, with all the memories inside it, was something no one could simply take away from me. And it was that peace, that trust, that kept me from noticing that everything was slowly changing. Very slowly. Very quietly. Until it was too late to turn back. Things didn't change all at once. They unfolded so slowly that at first I didn't even notice. My son began asking about the house more often than before. Not vague questions, but particular ones. Do you still have any loans on the house? How much are the property taxes each year? With a house this old, the repairs must be expensive, right? I answered out of habit without thinking too much. I assumed he was asking because he cared, because he was worried about me living alone in a large house. That was how I reassured myself at the time. Then one day he said casually, as if it were just a passing thought, "Have you ever thought about selling the house?" I smiled and told him I wasn't ready, that this house wasn't just 4 walls. He nodded and didn't say anything more. But from that day on, the topic kept returning from time to time, in different forms. A lot of older people move into smaller, more convenient apartments. Nursing homes are very different now, Mom. They're not like what you imagine. I began to feel uncomfortable, not because of the suggestion itself, but because of the way he said it, as if the decision had already been considered, as if I were simply someone who needed to be persuaded. My daughter-in-law also started paying more attention to the house whenever she visited. Before, she would greet me politely and sit down for a brief conversation. Lately, her eyes would scan every corner of the room. She asked about the age of the roof, the heating system, and the value of the land. Once, she casually remarked that property prices in this area had gone up a lot. Those comments weren't malicious. At least, they didn't sound that way. But they made me feel like I was being evaluated, not as a mother, but as an asset. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I told myself I was overthinking, that children worrying about their parents was normal. These days, everyone thinks about financial planning, but there were tiny moments, difficult to put into words. The way my son spoke more slowly when explaining things, as if he were afraid I wouldn't understand. The way he asked if I had taken my medication, even though I wasn't sick. The way he emphasized the word safe every time he mentioned a nursing home. I began to feel like I was being viewed as someone who was no longer capable of making my own decisions. That feeling didn't come all at once. It crept in, little by little, leaving me both irritated and unsettled. One evening, after finishing a phone call with my son, I sat alone in the living room for a long time. I wondered if I was being too sensitive, if I were struggling to accept that I was getting older, if I was overreacting to my child's concern. I looked around the house. Everything was still familiar, still in its place. I knew exactly where I was and how I was living, but for the first time, I felt like I had to prove it, even though no one had directly asked me to. And it was then that I began to understand that those questions weren't just casual check-ins. They were the first steps towards something larger, something that, at the time, I still didn't dare to name. That afternoon, my son arrived without warning. I was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner when I heard a car stop outside. I looked out the window and saw him getting out alone. His wife wasn't with him. A flicker of unease passed through me, brief but strong enough to make me set the knife down. He walked into the house without waiting for an invitation. It was the same familiar living room where he used to do his homework, where our family once gathered every evening. But that day, the atmosphere was completely different. He stood in the middle of the room, not looking at me right away, as if arranging something in his mind. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was calm, too calm. I wiped my hands on my apron and sat down in the chair near the window. I didn't know why my heart was beating so fast. "Mom, I've sold this house." The words landed softly, but inside me, everything collapsed. I looked at him, waiting for a smile, waiting for some sign that this was a terrible joke, but there was nothing. His face was serious, like he was announcing something already settled. "You have about 2 days to pack. They'll be moving in soon." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. In that moment, I didn't think to ask who he had sold it to, when it was sold, or how he had even managed to sell it. I only felt the house around me suddenly become unfamiliar, as if I were being pushed out of my own life. He continued speaking, as though reading from a prepared plan. He said he had found me a new place to live, somewhere safer, smaller, with people to take care of me. Everything would be convenient. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I listened, but I didn't really hear what he said. Words like safe, care, and convenient passed by without settling. I only looked at the face of the child I had given birth to, trying to find something familiar, but I couldn't. I saw myself being neatly placed into a solution, like an object that needed to be relocated. There were many things I could have said at the time. I could have gotten angry. I could have confronted him. I could have cried. But I did none of those things. I sat still, my hands resting on my knees, my back straight, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Is that so? That was all. 2 simple words. I saw his eyes hesitate for a moment, as if he hadn't expected that reaction. If that's the case, I continued, then tell me where this new place is. He nodded, as if everything had been resolved. He left a piece of paper with an address and added a few instructions, then turned to leave. Before stepping out the door, he told me not to make things complicated, that he was doing this for my own good. The door closed. The sound of the car faded away. I stood up slowly, walked around the living room, and touched each familiar object. The house was still there. But for the first time, I felt utterly alone in my own home. That night, I barely slept. The house was so quiet that I could hear every gust of wind slipping through the window frames. Everything was still in its place, but the sense of safety was gone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with unanswered questions. What if he was right? What if I really was too old to live on my own? I sat up, put on a sweater, and went down to the living room. The chair where my husband used to sit was still there. I sat down and rested my hand on the armrest, suddenly feeling my throat tighten. We used to say we would grow old in this house together. I never thought there would come a day when I would question whether I should leave it. I began thinking about my son when he was little. He used to be afraid of the dark. On nights when the power went out, he would crawl under my blanket and hold my hand tightly until he fell asleep. I remember that feeling clearly, the feeling of being needed, of being trusted completely. I wondered what I had done wrong. Had I been too independent? Had I unintentionally made him think I didn't need him anymore? And then I considered the possibility that if I gave in, things might go smoothly. I wouldn't lose my son. I wouldn't have to face the coldness in his voice. I picked up my phone. My son's name appeared on the screen. I was about to call him. I would think again. Maybe I had reacted too rigidly that I was willing to listen more. My finger hovered over the screen for a long time. Then I remembered his eyes that afternoon. Not the eyes of someone worried, but the eyes of someone who had already decided for me. I remembered the way he spoke about me as a problem to be handled. I remembered the feeling of being neatly pushed aside. I put the phone down. My heart was pounding, not from anger, but from fear. Fear that if I called, I would lose the last chance to protect myself. Fear that with one poorly timed apology, I would be pushed out of this house forever. That was the moment I understood that love cannot exist without respect. And if I didn't stand firm now, there would be no one left to stand in my place. The next morning I woke up very early, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to settle. The confusion from the night before was still there, but it had softened, giving way to something else. A strong urge to understand what was really happening. I didn't call my son. I didn't start packing either. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept my important documents, the papers I had organized carefully for years, even though I rarely needed them. The deed to the house, tax records, the property documents that my husband and I signed together. I sat at the table, put on my glasses, and read each page slowly, not because I didn't understand them, but because I wanted to be certain. I clearly remembered that several years ago, when my husband was still alive, we had updated some of the paperwork at our lawyer's advice. At the time, we thought it was simply to make things more straightforward and avoid complications later. Then I saw something that made me stop. This house was not registered under my name alone. It was placed under a private asset arrangement, with me holding full decision-making authority during my lifetime. I read that section again, then again. My heart began to race, not from fear, but from an obvious realization. If that were the case, my son could not sell this house on his own. That thought sent a chill through me. Not relief, but the weight of what it implied. If my son had no legal right to sell the house, then what he said the afternoon before could only mean one of two things. Either he had lied, or he was trying to force me into doing something. I didn't rush to conclusions. I knew I needed more information. I opened my laptop, the one my son assumed I only used to read the news. I checked property records and made several necessary phone calls. Every answer I received was the same. No legal transaction had been recorded. That was when the picture began to come together, piece by piece. I thought back to my son's recent questions about loans, about expenses, about the value of the house. I remembered the urgency in his voice, even though he tried to hide it. I began to wonder what had pushed him into such a state of pressure. I thought about money, not my money, but his. I started tracing the minor signs I had previously ignored. He has vague complaints about work stress, his half-joking comments about expenses, the expensive trips I had seen only through a few rare photos. I didn't need to dig very deep, just enough to realize that his life outside was not as stable as he presented it to be, that the confidence he showed the afternoon before may not have come from strength, but from the recklessness of someone backed into a corner. And then I understood. Selling the house was not the outcome. It was the tool, a way to frighten me, a way to make me sign something with my own hands, something he could not do himself. That realization made me shudder, not from anger, but from understanding how close I had come to the edge. If I had weakened just a little more, if I had called to apologize the night before, everything might have taken a different turn. I folded the stack of documents and placed them neatly on the table. For the first time since this began, I no longer felt like a passive victim. I didn't yet know what to do next. But I knew one thing with certainty. This was not just a misunderstanding, and I could no longer pretend that everything would somehow fix itself. As the truth became clearer, my initial reaction was not one of anger, nor was it a desire for immediate confrontation. What I felt was a sharp, deliberate coldness. Not fear, but the understanding that if I revealed my emotions now, I would lose my advantage. I decided not to call my son, not to ask questions, not to say that I had discovered anything. I let everything continue as if I were still confused, still considering the idea of moving out. When my son texted to ask whether I had started packing, I replied briefly. I said I needed more time, that I was tired. I knew I was playing the role of a weak woman. And sadly, it was a role that was easy to believe, because in my son's eyes, I had always been that way. Meanwhile, I began doing things I had never imagined I would need to do. I documented every phone call, saved every message, kept every piece of paper my son gave me. Small things I had once ignored now became evidence. I continued my research as well, quietly, carefully. I confirmed the legal status of the house. I asked detailed questions about what my son could and could not do. Each answer made me more certain that I was not imagining the danger, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. Not because I wasn't clear-minded, but because some things needed to be handled properly, by the right person at the right time. I thought of someone, a lawyer whom my husband and I had worked with years ago. I hadn't contacted her in a long time. I had hoped I never would. But that morning, I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time before finally dialing the number. When she answered, her voice was as steady and firm as I remembered. I didn't go into details. I simply told her that my son was pressuring me to leave my house and that I needed to understand what I was facing. She was silent for a moment, then told me I had done the right thing by not signing or agreeing to anything, that I needed to maintain the current situation, that every next step had to be calculated carefully. After hanging up, I sat alone in the living room, no longer confused, but not yet at ease either. I understood that I had stepped into a confrontation, one my family had not yet realized was happening. I was still in this house. But from that moment on, I was no longer just a passive mother. I was preparing to protect myself, and I would do it quietly until there was no other choice. 2 days after that conversation, I was in the kitchen when I heard a truck stop in front of the house. The sound was unfamiliar, heavy. I walked to the window and looked down, my heart tightening. A large white truck was parked right outside the gate. The logo of a moving company was printed on its side. I stood still for a few seconds, not out of fear, but because I immediately understood what was happening. My son hadn't waited for my consent. He had decided for me. 2 men stepped out of the truck, each carrying a clipboard. They walked straight to the front door and knocked. 3 firm, deliberate knocks. I didn't open the door. I stood behind it, listening to my heart beat slowly but heavily. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was my son. I didn't answer. After a few minutes, I opened the door, but not to let them in. I stood in the doorway close enough to speak, far enough to keep distance. One of the men said they had been hired to help me move out today, that everything had already been arranged. I told them I had not hired them. I had not agreed to move. They looked at each other, a confused expression on their faces. One of them mentioned my son's name, saying he was the one who had signed the contract and paid. I asked them to wait a few minutes. I called my lawyer. Her voice was calm, just like before. I explained the situation quickly. She told me to hand the phone to them. When one of the men took it, his attitude changed almost immediately. I couldn't hear everything that was said, but I watched his expression tighten, then saw him nod repeatedly. The call ended. He handed the phone back to me and said they had been hired incorrectly. The person who signed the contract had no legal authority to remove belongings from this house. They apologized, returned to their truck, and began packing up their equipment. At that moment, my son's car pulled up. He stepped out quickly. His eyes moved from the moving truck preparing to leave, then fixed on me. For the first time, I clearly saw panic on his face. Not anger, no confidence, but genuine fear. "What are you doing, Mom?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him and then said calmly that I had spoken to a lawyer, that I hadn't agreed to anything. Hiring movers without my consent was not right. He froze. I saw his lips press together. He said he was only trying to help me, that I was making things more complicated. But those words no longer carried weight, not because I had changed, but because he had been exposed. Strangers had stood at my front door. A company had been dragged into this situation. This was no longer just a private matter between mother and son. When the moving truck drove away, my son stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and left without another word. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and exhaled slowly. For the first time since all of this began, I knew one thing for sure. I was not imagining the danger, and my son knew it too. His plan was no longer hidden in the shadows. After the moving truck left, the house fell silent again. But it was no longer a comforting kind of quiet. It felt more like the pause before another wave. I knew my son would not stop there, and I didn't have to wait long for it to happen. The first email arrived the next morning. Long, very long. It was from my daughter-in-law. Her tone was gentle, every sentence carefully chosen. She said everything had been a misunderstanding, that my son was simply too worried about me. That work pressure had caused him to act impulsively. She mentioned family, shared meals, and reminded me that I was the most important person to them. I read the entire email, every line, and I realized something. In the whole message, there wasn't a single clear apology, only explanations, only reasons, the only way to place me in the position of someone who should understand. I didn't reply. 2 days later, flowers arrived. A large bouquet, precisely the kind I used to like. The card had only a few short lines, that he was sorry, that he didn't want to upset me, that we should talk again, as a family. I put the flowers in a vase. They were beautiful, but I didn't call. Then the phone calls began. Sometimes my son sounded exhausted, sometimes irritated. At other times, his voice was so gentle that it almost made me give in. He said I was listening to outsiders more than my own family, that I was taking things too far, that I was the one who would tear the family apart. There were moments when I held the phone for an extended period of time. I wanted to say that I was hurting too, that I never wanted things to turn out this way. I wanted to ask him why he chose that path, but I remembered what the lawyer had told me, that silence right now was not indifference. It was self-protection. I learned not to react immediately. I learned to let emotions pass without trying to resolve them with words. That was the hardest thing I had ever done as a mother. Fortunately, I wasn't alone. My friends began to notice that something was wrong. One stopped by with a pot of hot soup. Another sat with me over tea for a long time without asking many questions. I told them everything, piece by piece, not to complain, but to hear myself say out loud what was actually happening. Through one friend, I learned about a small local support group, older people who had gone through similar situations. I attended a meeting and sat quietly listening to their stories. Different circumstances, but the same feeling. Being dismissed, being pressured, being made to doubt themselves. That was when I understood that what my son was doing was not a concern. It was manipulation, and if I continued responding to half-hearted apologies and calculated gestures, I would be pulled right back into that cycle. I went home that evening with a very different feeling. I no longer felt as alone as before. I knew I was doing something difficult, but for the first time in a long while, I also knew I was doing the right thing for myself. I began to sense a change in the way my son contacted me. There were no more long apologies, no more flowers or weary voices. Instead, there was prolonged silence, then suddenly broken by an unannounced visit. They arrived on a weekday morning. My son, my daughter-in-law, and a woman I didn't know. She was neatly dressed, carrying a thin folder. Her expression was serious, but she was trying to appear friendly. My son introduced her as someone who evaluates the independent living capacity of older adults. He spoke casually, as if this were an obvious next step. He said they only wanted to make sure I was safe, that it wasn't a big deal. I stood at the front door. I didn't invite them in. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. Perhaps because I had been preparing for this moment longer than I realized. I said that I did not agree to any evaluation, that I hadn't signed anything, that I had not requested this kind of assistance. The woman smiled and said that many older people don't realize when they need help. That denial itself can be a notable sign. Her words sent a chill through me. Not fear, but understanding. If I reacted emotionally, if I lost my composure, if I raised my voice, everything I did could be recorded in a way that worked against me. I took a deep breath. I said calmly that I lived independently. I managed my own finances. I took care of my health. I had a clear daily routine. I had a community, friends, and people with whom I was in regular contact. My son interrupted, saying that I had changed recently, that I was suspicious without reason, that I was refusing help. This could be a sign of cognitive issues. I looked straight at him. I didn't argue. I asked only one question. If he was truly worried about me, why had he hired movers without my consent? Why had he claimed the house was sold when no legal transaction existed? The front yard fell utterly silent. I took out my phone. I opened the messages, the notes, the dates, and times. I said that every call had been documented, that my lawyer was fully aware of the situation, and that any further action taken without my consent would no longer be a family matter. The woman's demeanor changed immediately. She said she had come at the family's request, that if I did not consent, she could not proceed. I could see the discomfort in her eyes. Perhaps she realized she was standing on fragile ground. My daughter-in-law stood behind them, silent. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on her face. My son was different. He said nothing more, but I could see the anger clearly. Not because I was weak, but because I was no longer easy to control. They left shortly afterwards. No goodbye, no explanation. I closed the door, leaned against it, my hands trembling slightly, not because I had won a confrontation, but because I fully understood what had just happened. My son was ready to strip me of my right to make my own decisions. And from that moment on, I knew this was no longer about persuasion or misunderstanding. This was a real battle. And if I slipped even once, I could lose everything. The court summons arrived on a morning of light rain. My son had formally petitioned the court to strip me of my right to make my own decisions, claiming that I was no longer capable of caring for myself or managing my assets. I read it slowly, line by line. My hands did not shake, but my chest felt unbearably heavy. Even though I had prepared myself, I couldn't avoid the pain. Not because I feared losing my house, but because the name on that petition belonged to my son, the child I once held by the hand on the way to school, the one I stayed up all night with when he had a fever. My lawyer told me this was a dangerous move, but also their final one, that once everything was brought before the court, the truth would have to face the light. On the day of the hearing, I arrived early. The courtroom was small, cold, and quiet. My son sat across from me with his attorney. My daughter-in-law sat behind him, her face tense. When I walked in, he glanced at me briefly, then looked away. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew exactly where I was. When the hearing began, my son's lawyer spoke first. He was smooth and confident. He described me as an older woman living alone who was increasingly suspicious of family members, refused help, and behaved uncooperatively. He said my son only wanted to protect his mother, that everything he did came from concern. Then my son was called to speak. He stood up, his voice slow and low, tinged with emotion. He said he was afraid I might fall at home and no one would know, afraid I might forget to take my medication. I was concerned that I had lost my clarity of mind to make crucial decisions. He said he only wanted me to be safe, even if it meant being misunderstood. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him. I watched him stand there, playing the role of a devoted son convincingly, and suddenly I understood something harrowing. He had prepared very carefully for this moment. Then it was my lawyer's turn. She stood up without haste. Her voice was neither loud nor sharp, but every word was precise. She began by describing my daily life. I drove myself, I managed my finances, I participated in community activities, I had complete medical records confirming normal cognitive function. Then she moved to the more critical part. She presented evidence that my son had hired movers without my consent. She submitted text messages, call logs, and inconsistencies in his statements. She asked directly, if he were genuinely concerned about my safety, why did he pressure me to leave my home by falsely claiming the house had already been sold? The courtroom fell silent. My lawyer continued. She explained that the house could not legally be sold without my signature. She stated clearly that creating panic to force an older adult to sign documents constituted grave coercion. The judge listened carefully. I noticed her gaze linger longer when that detail was mentioned. Finally, I was asked to speak. I stood up, placing my hands lightly on the table. I did not cry. I did not accuse. I simply told my story. I spoke about my life, about the fact that I was not against receiving help, but that I needed to be respected. I said I was willing to listen to my son, but I could not accept being deceived and pressured. I said the most painful part was not the risk of losing my home, but that my son had chosen to treat me as a problem to be managed rather than a person with the right to decide for herself. After hearing everything, The judge called for a short recess. When she returned, her voice was firm. She stated that there was no evidence to suggest I lacked capacity, that I was fully capable of making my own decisions. My son's actions were inappropriate and went beyond what was reasonable. The petition to remove my decision-making rights was denied. I sat down, feeling as if I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for a very long time. My son lowered his head. My daughter-in-law turned away. No one spoke. As I left the courtroom, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. The truth had been spoken, and for the first time since all of this began, I knew with certainty that I would not be pushed out of my own life. After the hearing, the matter did not conclude immediately, but the wheels had begun turning in a different direction, and there was no stopping them now. What my son had done was no longer a private family matter. The case file was forwarded to the relevant authorities. Questions began to arise at his workplace, not because anyone wanted to punish him, but because his actions revealed a severe lack of integrity. I didn't know every detail. I didn't want to. I only heard bits and pieces from acquaintances that he had been temporarily suspended from work. The financial plans he once used to project success were no longer stable, that the debts he had kept hidden began to surface once he could no longer juggle them. His own family life was also affected. The new house he had once been proud of no longer belonged to him. The trips he used to talk about were no longer mentioned. Relationships built on image and success slowly withdrew. I listened to all of this with a strange sense of unease. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel like I had won. I only felt sad. Sadly, things have gone this far. Sad that the son I trusted had led himself down that path. Some afternoons, I sat alone in the living room, looking out at the garden, and wondered if things could have turned out differently. If we had talked earlier, if he had chosen another way. But those questions no longer mattered. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had done what I needed to do to protect myself, not out of revenge, not to teach anyone a lesson, but to preserve my right to live my own life. Relief came slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. It appeared in the most minor things, in waking up each morning in the familiar house. I no longer flinch when my phone rings, being able to sit still without wondering what I would be forced to do next. I lost something through all of this, perhaps innocence, perhaps unconditional trust, but in return I kept something far more important: safety, respect, and the right to make my own decisions. Sometime after the court hearing, my son sent me a message. It wasn't long. It didn't place blame. He simply said he was sorry for taking things too far and that he never expected everything to end the way it did. I read that message many times, not to judge whether it was sincere, but to listen to my own feelings. I realized that I was no longer as angry as I had been before, but I also wasn't ready to return to things as if nothing had happened. We did not reunite. There were no warm family dinners like in the past, no long conversations, and I accepted that, because some fractures, even when forgiveness exists, cannot disappear overnight. However, I also did not hold on to resentment. I did not want the rest of my life to be governed by bitterness. I chose forgiveness, not to erase what had happened, but to free myself from the weight of anger. Forgiveness, to me now, does not mean throwing the door wide open. It means closing it calmly. I made my boundaries clear. I do not sign any documents related to my assets. I do not allow anyone to make decisions on my behalf. Any communication, if it exists, must respect those boundaries. No exceptions. No ambiguity. Holding boundaries does not make me a cold mother. It makes me an adult who knows how to protect herself. And if one day my son truly changes, those boundaries will be a safe place where we can stand and talk, not a battlefield. Forgiveness did not make me weaker. On the contrary, it lightened my heart. I no longer carry my pain like a burden. I set it down, right here, and continue living the rest of my life with the clarity I paid a great price to gain. My life afterwards was not dramatic. There were no significant changes that drew attention from the outside. But to me, each passing day carried a very different meaning. I still wake up in the same old house, make my coffee and open the windows to look out at the garden. Everything is familiar, yet the feeling is new. I no longer live in fear or wait for the next shock. I spend more time with friends, the ones who stood by me when I needed them, most. We meet more often now. Sometimes it's just tea together. Sometimes we walk around the neighborhood. I've come to understand that family is not formed by blood alone. It also grows from relationships built on respect and sincerity. I've also become more involved in community activities. Through the support group, I've met other older people who were once as confused and frightened as I had been. I listen to them. I share my story, not to prove anything, but to let them know they are not alone, that they have the right to ask questions, the right to say no, and the right to protect themselves. Helping others reminds me that I still have value, not because I overcame something extraordinary, but because I understand their fear. And sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "I believe you," for everything to begin to change. I still think about my son, not as often as before, but I do not deny his place in my life. He is my son. That has not changed. But the way I love him has. I love with awareness, with clear boundaries, and with respect for myself. Family matters. I have never thought otherwise. But through everything I've experienced, I've learned something more. Respect matters even more. No bond is strong enough to justify control or coercion. Forgiveness is the same. Forgiveness does not mean returning to endure harm. It does not require sacrificing your safety or your dignity. True forgiveness is letting go of resentment while still holding firm to necessary boundaries. If you are listening to this story and see yourself somewhere in it, there is only one thing I want to say. You are not too old to stand up for yourself, and you are not selfish for choosing to protect the life you spent a lifetime building. Thank you for staying until the end. I hope my story brings you a little strength, a little clarity, and a gentle reminder that you deserve respect, even within your own family.